Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Director of the Utah Foundation, Steve Kroes.
Hello. Good morning. It is a privilege to be with you this morning. I want to tell you a little story. So about 14 years ago, I received a phone call one Saturday afternoon that led eventually to a conversation about coming to Utah to run a small think tank research organization that I had admired for a number of years, Utah Foundation. And as I considered this move, I discussed it with my family, with my wife, and we weren't strangers to Utah. I grew up in Northern California. We were comfortable there. We were living in a nice suburb and feeling at ease. Our daughter was in a good school. The neighborhood was great. But we knew some things about Utah, and we were interested in it. And I said to my wife, you know, these summer vacations that we take in Utah are fantastic. I love how close the mountains are. I love going camping in the Uintas. I also love the idea that we could afford a nice house close to the mountains, and we could have that big yard that I could have all the fruit trees I've ever dreamed of and the garden of my dreams. And this all sounded good, and she said, well, yes, and I would love to live near my family, but what about the children? What about the schools? And we knew two things about Utah. We knew that Utah has a lot of kids and not a lot of tax money to go around. So that leads to a couple other things. It leads to a low amount of funding per pupil and a large class size on average. And those were concerns. Those were negatives. We weren't sure that we wanted to do that. Now, I admit that California isn't exactly the pinnacle of educational achievement either, but we were living in a great suburb with some good schools. And so we had to think about this, and we decided, let's talk to some friends, let's talk to some family who have kids in school in Utah, and let's see what they think. We did, and we heard some positive, encouraging things. And this was around 2001. So I decided to go online. I'm a researcher. I looked at data. And the data from the 1990s about Utah's educational performance was surprisingly good. We saw numbers that showed Utah 10th highest in the country in reading and 15th highest in the nation in math. And I said to my wife, we found our Lake Wobegon. Do you know Lake Wobegon? The mythical small town in Minnesota that Garrison Keillor talks about where all the children are above average. And it's great stories. And I said, we found our Lake Wobegon, let's go. This seals the deal. Everything looks like a win. So we packed up the kids, sold the house, came to Utah, and watched as the kids entered school and began to learn, and watched teachers dealing with classes of 28 students in fourth grade and teaching them reading and writing and math and science and all of those important subjects. And we watched parents volunteering and, of course, the many hours that parents have to spend on homework and everybody pulling together. And in my job, involved in watching politics and public policy, I saw elected officials who really cared about the future of our kids, and a lot of energy being placed into discussing the future of education. And we don't always agree, right, on what the solutions are for education, but everybody's heart is in the right place in terms of we want a strong future for our kids. And we saw that and we were pleased. But over the next 10 years that we lived here, we started to see this disheartening slide in the rankings, in the outcomes of our school system. And so watching data that relates to the economy and Utah, I saw that that reading score of 10th highest in the country started to fall to where it eventually landed at about 28th in the country. That math score of 15th highest in the country slid all the way down to 30th in the nation. And we were just about average. And that doesn't seem like where Utah wants to be, but we had fallen to about average. Now, one of the interesting things that you can see in the data in the last few years is that on the national assessments, our reading scores have actually started to rebound. And did you know that in 2013, Utah 8th graders had regained some ground and scored 13th best in the country on the National Assessment of Educational Progress in reading? 13th best. So maybe we can recapture that mythical Lake Wobegon that I thought we were moving to. Well, how did we get back to 13th? It's impossible to look at data and say, this is the reason why our test scores increase, but there are some things that are important. And as I talk to education leaders to understand what are some of the reasons they think our scores are improving in reading, they all say, look to the Olene Walker K-3 reading program. And that was a program that back in 2004, when Governor Walker served that 1 year as governor, she was committed and went to the mat politically, spent nearly all of her political capital to get that passed. The legislature responded, funded it, kept it funded, even after she was no longer governor. And it just so happens that those 8th graders in 2013, they're the kindergartners from 2005 who started in that Olene Walker K-3 reading initiative. And there's probably a correlation there. Of course, you can't prove it with the data, but it seems like there's a correlation. And so someone had courage to stand up for an educational reform and made it happen. But looking at math, I mentioned that we had slid in our math scores. We stand at 28th in the nation right now for 8th grade math achievement. Where does the nation stand? The OECD has a test called PISA. And in that test, we can see that 22 nations are significantly outperforming America in math achievement. This is most of Northern Europe. It's the advanced economies of Asia. And we, as Utah, are in the middle of a pack that isn't even keeping up with the other packs that are ahead of us out there in the world. And that's a concern. Why is it a concern? There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's a concern. But one of them is that jobs are mobile. And we know that today's jobs in Utah, 5 years from now, could be jobs in Taiwan or Ireland or Germany or Korea. And we need to hold on to the economic development success that we've had in this state. And we've put a lot of work into economic development success, and a lot of great things have been done. I hear more frequently from economic development officials that one of their biggest worries is being able to convince companies that are either locating here, relocating, or moving here, or staying here, that we can provide, as a state, the educated workforce that they need. That's becoming their biggest concern. We also hear some positive stories, and one that I've heard in recent speeches is that apparently Goldman Sachs says that of all their locations in North America, the Salt Lake City location is the most requested location for employee moves. And that's something that makes us proud, because we realize that for that to happen, we have maintained a quality of life in this state that is attractive enough that people, even living in world-class cities like New York and San Francisco, want to move to Salt Lake City. And we can be proud of that, and we benefit from them being here. But hidden in that statement is the concept that Goldman Sachs needs to move people to Utah. They need to move people here. Are we not providing the skilled workforce that they need to run this world-class financial services company? I'd rather hear stories that Goldman Sachs tells us that of all their locations worldwide, Salt Lake City is the #1 location for providing the labor that they need to succeed. Now, as we think about math and other areas of achievement and where we need to improve, our future depends on this. And I'll just close by mentioning, after moving to Utah, we had another little one in our family, and my little McKay is 7 years old. He's in 2nd grade. And more than any other 2nd grader that I've ever known, this kid will tell you with conviction what he wants to be when he grows up. And yes, I can thank George Lucas for this, but McKay wants to be a robotics engineer. And so his vision is not to create the next C-3PO and R2-D2, which I think would be, really cool. His vision is to create some kind of giant flying robot. I have no idea what this giant flying robot will do for humanity, but he's got some ideas, and he's committed to do this. If he's going to succeed in doing that, and I want him to succeed at doing that, and you have children and grandchildren that have dreams, and you want them to succeed at doing this, he's going to need strong math instruction so he can get into a university that has a strong engineering program, and he can study robotics and change the world with his giant flying robot. So it's time for change. It's time for the kind of courage that we've seen in the last 15 years We can get back that mythical Lake Wobegon that I once thought Utah was, and we're getting close in reading. We've got some ways to go in math. We've got some strength in science, but we can do it. And it's time for some courage and some action. Thanks.